The long-awaited wedding day had finally arrived for Elisa. Everything went according to plan, a grand celebration. Guests arriving with wide smiles and her husband, Marcus, looking incredibly handsome by her side. Elisa felt like a princess, wrapped in a radiant white gown, her face adorned with pure happiness. No one could doubt the joy they felt, at least for that day. However, one thing felt slightly odd: the wedding gift they had received. It was a large mirror with an intricately carved antique frame, its glass so clear that it seemed as if it could swallow anyone who stared too long. The mirror came with no sender's name, only a small card that read, "Rior for the newlyweds. May you find eternal happiness. Marcus, always one to appreciate antique objects," eagerly placed the mirror in their bridal chamber, hanging it on the wall directly across from their bed. Elisa, though slightly unsettled by it, paid little mind. She was too happy with her marriage to care. That night, after the guests had left and silence draped over their new home, Elisa sat at her vanity, wiping away the remnants of her makeup. The bedroom was dimly lit, illuminated only by the soft glow of candlelight. She glanced at the large mirror before her. At first, she only saw her own reflection staring back at her. But then, something shifted. Behind her reflection, a faint silhouette appeared, a man with an unnervingly pale face and hollow eyes, gazing at her with an unfathomable depth. Elisa gasped, nearly falling from her chair. But when she blinked and looked again, the shadow was gone, as if it had never been there. Her heart pounded as she tried to steady her breath. It must have been my imagination, she told herself. Yet even as she continued her nightly routine, an uneasy feeling clung to her. That night, as she lay beside Marcus in bed, she tried to sleep, but the presence of the mirror gnawed at her thoughts. Every so often, she stole a glance at it, half expecting to see the shadowy figure again. But the mirror remained empty, as if waiting. Days passed, and though Elisa tried to ignore it, the tension only grew. Every time she walked past the mirror, she felt an invisible gaze following her. Marcus, unaware of her unease, dismissed it as mere remnants of the excitement from their wedding. But one night, as she stirred awake from sleep, she heard a whisper, "Elisa." It was faint yet unmistakable. The voice came from the mirror, calling her name with a soft yet compelling tone. Elisa bolted upright, her gaze snapping toward the large mirror. But there was nothing, only her own tired reflection staring back. Yet within the darkness of that reflection, something moved. A figure blurred but undeniably real emerged. A man, deathly pale, his eyes hollow yet filled with a sorrowful longing. And as their eyes met, something within Elisa stirred, a yearning to understand who he was, what he wanted, and why he had been watching her for so long. That night, fear and confusion consumed her. Why did she feel drawn to the specter in the mirror? Why did an unexplainable emotion creep into her heart every time she looked at him? Deep down, she knew the mirror was no ordinary object. And as she turned to look at Marcus, still peacefully asleep beside her, her heart pounded. Everything, all of this, began with that beautiful wedding gift. But something far darker lay hidden within the mirror's reflection. Several nights after that event, Elisa became increasingly obsessed with the large mirror in their room, although Marcus tried to reassure her, saying that post-wedding exhaustion might be affecting her sleep. Elisa could not shake off the feeling that haunted her. Every time she stepped into the room, her eyes unconsciously darted toward the mirror, and with it, the shadow of the pale man who seemed to follow her every move. On the 5th night after the strange event, Elisa couldn't take it any longer. As Marcus slept, she quietly rose and approached the mirror. Her heart raced as she tried to calm herself. Perhaps this was all just a dream, she thought. But the mirror, something about it felt wrong. She gazed at her reflection in the mirror. Then, as she had feared, the pale man's shadow appeared again, slowly becoming visible, showing his face, pale and expressionless. This time his eyes were wide open, staring directly at her. Elisa froze, as if some unseen force had taken hold of her. She tried to move, but her body felt paralyzed, unable to act. "Elisa?" The whisper came again, clearer this time, calling her name in a voice that was almost seductive. "What do you want?" Elisa whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond in words, but his face came closer, so close that Elisa could almost feel his presence. His face became clearer, pale, his skin weathered with time, as though he had been dead for a long while. Yet there was something in his eyes, a deep sadness, a longing, that made Elisa feel strangely drawn to him. She could feel his grief and the unspoken desire for connection. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to look away. And just like that, the figure vanished, as though it had never been there at all. The mirror reflected only the empty room behind her. Elisa took a deep breath, feeling both confused and frightened. She quickly ran back to the bed, trying to sleep, but her mind refused to rest. The next morning, Marcus asked if she was okay. Although Elisa tried to reassure him that everything was fine, the unease still lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Days passed slowly, but each time Elisa looked at the mirror, the figure appeared more often, each time clearer, more real and more intense. Without realizing it, she started spending more and more time standing in front of the mirror, staring at the pale man, though her heart raced with fear. Then one night, as Elisa stood in front of the mirror, something shocking happened. The pale figure didn't just watch her this time, he started speaking. "I know you feel trapped here," his voice whispered, soft but full of pressure. "I will never leave you, Elisa. You and I are bound by the same fate." Elisa froze, unable to speak. She tried to look away, but her body felt as if it were bound to the mirror. Who are you really?" Elisa asked in a barely audible voice, her body trembling. The man smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reassure her. "I am the one you left behind," he answered in a deep, mysterious voice. "I am the one forgotten, the one trapped here, in this mirror, because of a promise that was never kept." Elisa felt like she had been frozen by his words. She wanted to back away, to flee the room. But something about the man held her there. An unexplainable force, a pull so strong that she couldn't break free. But just as suddenly, as if snapping out of a trance, Elisa glanced at her husband, Marcus, who was asleep in their bed. A deep sense of guilt overwhelmed her. She felt like she had betrayed him by thinking too much about this figure, this mysterious and terrifying presence. Yet every time she looked at the mirror, it was impossible to ignore the gentle whispers, calling her, inviting her to come closer.